Hold on tight, folks, because we're diving deep into some seriously wild claims about mind control tech this time.
Yeah, this stuff is like straight out of a sci-fi thriller.
So get this. We've got claims about scalar weapons that can supposedly cause heart attacks remotely.
And they call it Satan, silent assassination through amplified neurons.
Seriously, Satan. Okay, then there's Tame Thought Amplifier and Mind Interface.
Which supposedly uses EEG cloning to, amplify one person's brainwaves onto another person.
Whoa, hold on. So they're saying they can basically copy and paste brainwaves. What else?
One source claims the government uses something called RHIC.
RHIC.
Yeah, it stands for Remote Hypnotic Intracerebral Control.
Okay, that sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It supposedly uses electromagnetic signals to manipulate emotions and thoughts.
Oh, and of course we've got MKUltra, but this time it's wireless, and they say it's happening right now.
These sources are packed with claims of advanced tech that sound like they belong in a dystopian novel.
All right, so let's get into the details. One of these documents, 82.txt, is a first-hand account from someone who believes they were a target of these mind control weapons.
And they describe some really intense stuff, hallucinations, feeling like they're being microwaved, even having violent thoughts implanted in their mind.
This is where it gets really strange, though. They claim they developed some kind of rapport with the people testing these weapons on them.
Yeah, even mocking them for aiming at the wrong side of their chest when trying to induce a heart attack.
That's both bizarre and unsettling.
It really makes you question how technology could be used in ways we can barely even imagine.
Another document alleges that the CIA has been researching methods to split personalities.
Erase memories.
Even implant false memories.
Like in that movie, The Forgotten.
They call it EDM, erasure of memory.
And this source claims that these programs, like MKUltra, are still ongoing.
Even after all the attempts to shut them down.
Yeah, and it also mentions the use of psychographic maps.
Psychographic maps.
To, predict how people will react to certain information.
So they're not just trying to control minds, but predict and manipulate our behavior on a huge scale.
That's what this source suggests.
This all sounds pretty unbelievable, but the source claims first-hand experience and goes into a lot of detail about how these technologies supposedly work.
Like their description of ionospheric heaters.
Ionospheric heaters.
Yeah, they say those are used to focus electromagnetic beams to specific locations.
For what?
For surveillance and mind control.
Wow, okay. What else?
They also talk about scalar interferometric stealth radar.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Which they claim is used to track and monitor millions of people at the same time.
Simultaneously. How?
They say it uses a time multiplexing scheme, similar to how cell phone transmitters work.
It's pretty complex stuff, and it really raises questions about the capabilities of modern-day surveillance systems.
It does.
We also have what seems to be a declassified CIA document from the 1950s.
Outlining various research areas the agency was exploring.
And it's a pretty disturbing list.
It includes things like materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia.
Substances which produce physical disablement.
And even substances which alter personality structure.
It sounds like something a mad scientist would write up.
It does.
What's even more disturbing is that the document mentions the need for a secure facility for clinical testing on human subjects.
Here's a quote. The security problems mentioned above are eliminated by the fact that the responsibility for the testing will rest completely upon the physician and the hospital.
It's a really casual way to talk about experimenting on people.
It is.
This document also mentions Experiment 7, recall of hypnotically acquired information by very specific signals.
That definitely gives off some serious MKUltra vibes, but with a technological twist.
It does.
It seems to support the claims about EEG cloning and remote hypnotic control that we saw in those other sources.
So they're talking about a whole system for mind control, hypnotic suggestion, electromagnetic manipulation.
And maybe even advanced pharmaceuticals.
And some reports suggest that these techniques might still be used today.
Potentially on American citizens.
We've got another document here that outlines a proposed research project on interrogation techniques.
But it goes beyond just getting information.
It's more about breaking people down psychologically.
Right. They talk about inducing regression, anxiety, and disorientation in subjects.
Even trying to drive them into a childlike mental state.
It's clear they were interested in controlling and manipulating the human mind.
The document even mentions using narcohypnosis.
Combining drugs and hypnosis.
To influence behavior and implant false memories.
Yeah, it raises some serious ethical concerns.
Speaking of ethical concerns, we've got a document that details a presentation on something called dominant remote control capabilities.
It's about exploring ways to remotely manipulate electronic systems.
For military purposes.
Right.
Imagine your car suddenly being taken over remotely.
Or your computer spreading false information without you knowing.
It's a pretty scary thought. A future where technology is weaponized to control every part of our lives.
The document even talks about taking control of enemy spacecraft, aircraft, and other military systems.
It sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi action movie, but these are real research projects by the military.
It makes you realize how technology could have some pretty devastating consequences.
It does.
We've also got a bunch of articles here detailing experiences from people who believe they are victims of these mind control technologies.
And their stories are pretty similar.
They describe experiencing auditory hallucinations, intrusive thoughts,
Sleep disturbances.
even physical pain that they think is being inflicted remotely,
It's like they feel like they're constantly being watched,
manipulated.
as if their minds aren't even theirs anymore.
Yep.
One article even quotes a victim saying, "By this time, the American intelligence communities had become involved. In 1992, a former Pentagon liaison indicated that if you could get a hold of a directory of the American Psychiatric Association in around 1956-57, you'll be sure to find an enormous percentage of individuals listed are foreign-born. Mostly, they came out of Germany and Eastern Europe in a big wave. They were called technical specialists, but really were working on techniques of behavior modification and mind control."
That's a pretty disturbing thought.
That experts in mind control could be infiltrating institutions.
And potentially influencing how mental illness is diagnosed and treated.
It makes you wonder if we can even trust the systems meant to help us.
Especially if there's a chance they're being manipulated for some darker purpose.
And these articles also highlight how hard it is for these individuals to be believed.
They're often met with skepticism,
Dismissal from their families,
friends,
even medical professionals,
often labeled as paranoid,
or delusional.
which just isolates them further and makes it harder to seek help.
It's a really sad situation.
It really shows how powerful disinformation can be.
And how easily people dismiss uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
Up next, we have an article that digs into the history of MKUltra.
The CIA's infamous mind control program.
It describes how they allegedly used LSD, hypnosis, and other techniques to control human behavior.
And despite claims that the program was shut down.
They say the evidence suggests that it continued in some form for decades.
This one passage is really disturbing.
What's it say?
It mentions the use of psychic driving.
Psychic driving.
Yeah, where they play a recorded message to a subject over and over.
For hours.
For hours on end.
Trying to reprogram their thoughts and beliefs.
Exactly.
It's a chilling reminder of how far some people believe those in power will go to control others.
It is.
This article also connects MKUltra to the development of even more advanced mind control tech.
Suggesting it laid the groundwork for the wireless electromagnetic manipulation techniques described in those other sources.
So they're saying the quest for mind control has been a continuous project for intelligence agencies.
Constantly evolving as new technology emerges.
It makes you wonder how far they've come since MKUltra.
And what it means for our freedom and autonomy in a world where these kinds of tools could exist.
It's definitely something to think about.
We've also got a scientific report that explores how converging technologies could be used to enhance human capabilities.
Like brain-machine interfaces, neuropharmaceuticals.
Genetic engineering.
So they're talking about enhancing human potential. But couldn't those same technologies be used to limit or control human capabilities?
That's the concern.
That's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, the report focuses on the positive uses, but acknowledges that these technologies could be misused for surveillance, control, and as weapons.
There's one line in the report that's particularly striking.
What's that?
It warns that converging technologies could blur the line between individuals and the entirety of humanity.
It's a pretty disturbing thought.
That technology could erase our individuality and merge us all into a collective hive mind.
It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
It makes you wonder if it's as far-fetched as we'd like to think.
Yeah, it does.
It's a reminder that we need to be careful about how we develop and use these technologies.
And to always keep in mind the potential for unintended consequences.
Next up, we've got a document detailing a proposed bill
to ban space-based weapons.
Interesting.
What's really interesting is the language that specifically prohibits electronic, psychotronic, or information weapons.
So even back then, they were aware of the potential for space-based platforms to be used for mind control.
and psychological manipulation.
So these concerns have been around for a while.
Definitely. They were even recognized at the highest levels of government.
This bill called for a global agreement to ban all space-based weapons.
Which is a good sign that at least some people were trying to address this threat.
But the bill never passed.
And the development of space-based weapons continues.
Including those with the potential for mind control.
It's a sobering reminder that even when people recognize the danger of these technologies, there isn't always the political will to do something about it.
It's true.
Especially when it comes to international cooperation.
Next, we have a document that tells the story of a former CIA agent who blew the whistle on what was happening in Guatemala.
About the agency's involvement in human rights abuses.
This agent's story is a powerful example of what intelligence agencies might do to silence people who threaten their secrets.
This person faced serious consequences for speaking out.
Like being denied their security clearance.
And being targeted by smear campaigns.
It highlights the immense risk involved in challenging powerful institutions.
And the incredible courage it takes to do so.
This case also sheds light on the CIA's alleged use of agent scrubs.
Where they remove agents from their records.
To cover up their involvement in illegal activities.
That's right.
If that's true, it makes it even harder to hold these agencies accountable for their actions.
It does.
It reminds us that the fight for transparency and accountability is ongoing.
And that it often requires people to risk their careers and even their lives.
We also have a declassified CIA interrogation manual here.
It outlines various techniques for getting information from subjects.
But it goes beyond traditional methods.
It describes psychological manipulation techniques.
Designed to break a subject's resistance and make them more open to suggestion.
Things like sleep deprivation.
Sensory overload.
Even using drugs to alter a subject's mental state.
One passage describes a technique called hypnotic regression.
Where they put the subject into a trance.
And regress them back to a childlike state.
Making them much more vulnerable to manipulation.
It makes you question whether the CIA was,
and maybe still is,
actively using techniques that border on psychological torture.
It's certainly possible.
The release of this manual caused outrage and condemnation from human rights groups.
Even from people within the intelligence community.
It's a stark reminder of the potential for abuse of power within these agencies.
And how important it is to hold them accountable. This next article talks about non-lethal weapons used for crowd control and military operations.
Including electromagnetic weapons.
Right?
But even though they're called non-lethal,
the article acknowledges they can have serious,
even fatal consequences.
They can cause burns.
Internal injuries.
Even neurological damage.
And the article also raises concerns about the long-term health effects of exposure to these weapons.
Which we still don't know much about.
One passage warns that because there aren't any visible injuries, it can be hard to assess the real damage caused by these weapons.
And that makes it easier to downplay their harmful effects.
That's pretty disturbing.
It is.
That these weapons could be used to inflict pain and suffering.
Without leaving a trace.
Making it almost impossible to hold anyone accountable.
Exactly.
The article also talks about the ethical problems of using these weapons on civilians.
It argues that using them raises serious questions about the use of force.
Proportionality.
And the potential for abuse.
It's a good reminder that even in the pursuit of security and order,
we can't lose sight of basic human rights and dignity.
Well said.
Next, we have an article that explores the work of Dr. Michael Persinger.
He was a neuroscientist who studied the effects of electromagnetic fields on the human brain.
Right.
His work focused on the idea that certain patterns of electromagnetic stimulation could induce altered states of consciousness.
Things like religious experiences and hallucinations.
He developed a device called the God helmet.
It used magnetic fields to stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain.
And his research suggested that this could make people feel a sensed presence, or even a connection to something greater.
Some people even felt like they were in the presence of God.
Wow, so he was basically trying to create religious experiences using electromagnetic fields?
In a way, yes. His work was quite controversial.
I can imagine.
His findings were met with both skepticism and intrigue.
It does make you think.
His research raised questions about the nature of consciousness.
And how external forces, like electromagnetic fields, might influence our thoughts, feelings, and spiritual experiences.
And it's worth pointing out that some of his research was funded by the U.S. military.
Really?
Suggesting they were interested in the potential applications of his work.
For mind control.
And psychological manipulation.
That's a little unnerving.
It is.
It reminds us that there's often a fine line between scientific research and military applications.
And that we need to be aware of the potential for scientific discoveries to be used for good or for bad.
Next up is an article about the potential misuse of brain-computer interfaces,
BCIs.
which allow for direct communication between the brain and external devices.
Right.
These technologies could change fields like medicine and rehabilitation.
Absolutely.
But they also raise concerns about privacy,
autonomy,
and the potential for manipulation.
One passage in the article warns that BCIs could be used to monitor and control our thoughts and actions,
Blurring the line between our minds and the digital world.
It's a pretty chilling thought.
That our most private thoughts and feelings could be accessed and manipulated by outside forces.
Yeah, it raises some fundamental questions about what it means to be human in an age of advanced technology.
It does.
We've also got an article about the work of Dr. Jose Delgado,
A neuroscientist who was a pioneer in the use of electrical stimulation to control behavior.
He developed a device called the stimoceiver,
which could be implanted in the brain,
and used to remotely stimulate certain brain regions.
His research showed that electrical stimulation could trigger all kinds of behaviors.
Aggression, fear, even pleasure.
So he could basically control behavior by directly stimulating different parts of the brain. That's wild.
It is pretty remarkable.
His work was very controversial.
He was accused of advocating for mind control to be used for social engineering.
But his research did highlight the potential for technology to directly influence human behavior,
raising ethical questions that are still relevant today.
especially with the advances in technology we see today.
Exactly.
And, like Dr. Persinger, Dr. Delgado's work was also funded by the U.S. military.
Suggesting they were interested in how his research could be used for mind control and warfare.
It's another reminder that the pursuit of scientific knowledge can lead to discoveries with both good and bad applications.
And that we need ethical considerations to guide scientific progress.
To make sure technology is used to help humanity.
Absolutely.
Next, we have an article discussing electronic harassment.
Where people report experiencing all sorts of symptoms.
Auditory hallucinations, skin sensations, physical pain.
And they believe these are being caused by directed energy weapons or other electromagnetic technologies.
These people often describe feeling like they're being targeted,
Tortured.
and monitored remotely.
It can be incredibly distressing and debilitating.
The article explores the challenges these people face in trying to be believed and taken seriously.
Because their claims often fall outside what's considered normal in medicine and science.
It also looks at the psychological and social impacts of electronic harassment.
Isolation, paranoia, even PTSD.
One passage highlights how difficult it is to prove or disprove claims of electronic harassment,
Especially because the tech involved is usually classified.
and because the symptoms can look like other conditions. It's a reminder that the world of intelligence and military technology is often shrouded in secrecy.
Making it hard to really understand the threats they might pose.
The article also raises questions about the ethics of developing and using technology for harassment and torture.
Even if those weren't the intended uses.
It makes you think.
It does.
It reminds us that we need to be careful about protecting our individual rights and freedoms.
Especially in the face of all this new technology.
We've also got an article that talks about the potential for converging technologies to create super soldiers.
Soldiers with enhanced physical and cognitive abilities.
They talk about using genetic engineering, brain-computer interfaces, and exoskeletons.
To create soldiers who are stronger, faster, and more resilient.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does.
But the article says that these possibilities need to be considered as technology progresses.
And it raises concerns about the ethics of creating these enhanced soldiers.
The potential for them to be used for aggression and oppression.
Right.
The article also points out the risks of blurring the lines between humans and machines.
And the potential for things to go wrong when we try to enhance our natural abilities with technology.
One passage warns that creating super soldiers could lead to an arms race.
Where countries compete to develop the most powerful and lethal weapons.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
It reminds us that technological progress can have unexpected and potentially dangerous consequences.
And that we need to work towards peaceful solutions to conflict.
Making sure that technology helps us work together and understand each other.
Instead of driving us apart.
Absolutely.
Next, we have a document that talks about the use of psyops in warfare and propaganda.
Psyops meaning psychological operations.
Right. Things like using disinformation, propaganda, even threats to influence how people feel, what they think, and how they behave.
And this article traces the history of psyops from ancient times to today.
highlighting how these techniques have been used to shape public opinion, demoralize enemies, and even start conflicts.
One passage describes PSYOPs as the invisible hand that shapes our perceptions and influences our decisions, often without our even realizing it.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is that we're constantly being bombarded with messages designed to influence us, and it's not always easy to figure out what's true.
That's right. It makes you realize that we need to be critical thinkers.
And that means questioning the information we're given and looking for different viewpoints.
Exactly.
We've also got an article about how artificial intelligence, AI, could be used for mind control and manipulation.
It describes how AI can create personalized propaganda,
Tailor messages to individual weaknesses and biases.
and even predict and influence behavior.
That's a pretty frightening thought. AI-powered propaganda designed to take advantage of our flaws.
It is. It's part of what makes AI so dangerous if it gets into the wrong hands.
This article also raises concerns about AI amplifying existing biases, creating echo chambers, and undermining critical thinking.
One passage warns that AI could create a world where we're constantly being manipulated by algorithms without even knowing it.
It's like a dystopian future where our thoughts are controlled by unseen forces.
It really highlights the need for ethical guidelines and regulations for how we develop and use AI.
Especially in areas that could affect our autonomy and freedom of thought.
Exactly.
Next, we're looking at an article about information warfare.
Where information is used as a weapon.
And this involves techniques like disinformation, propaganda, hacking, and cyber attacks.
All to disrupt, manipulate, and control the flow of information.
To achieve some strategic goal.
Right.
This article takes a look at the history of information warfare.
From ancient times to the present.
It highlights how important controlling information is in modern conflicts.
One passage describes information warfare as a battle for hearts and minds fought in the digital realm.
It's a reminder that the battlefields of the future might not be physical places, but the digital networks that connect us all.
That's true.
This article also talks about the challenges of fighting information warfare.
Because it often means trying to spot and counter subtle manipulation.
And disinformation.
Which can be hard to detect.
It reinforces the importance of critical thinking.
And being skeptical of the information we encounter.
We've also got an article that discusses the potential of converging technologies to create augmented reality environments. And they say these could be used for training, entertainment, even psychological manipulation.
AR systems can create immersive experiences that blend the real and virtual worlds.
Potentially blurring the lines between what's real and what's not.
That's right.
This sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, but these technologies are being developed as we speak.
So this is happening now.
The article raises concerns about the potential for AR to manipulate perceptions, create false memories, and even cause altered states of consciousness.
So instead of just adding to reality, they could be twisting it, creating a fake reality that's hard to tell apart from the real thing.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so potentially dangerous.
Especially if it falls into the wrong hands.
It could be used to create a world where we're constantly bombarded with information and simulations, making it hard to know what's real.
This article emphasizes the need for ethical guidelines and regulations for AR technologies.
Especially in areas that could affect human autonomy and freedom of thought.
It reminds us that we need to be proactive in shaping the future of technology.
Making sure it's used to help people and not control them.
Next up, we have an article that delves into the potential of nanotechnology for mind control and manipulation.
It talks about how nanobots, tiny robots that can be programmed for specific tasks,
could be used to interact with the brain, monitor neural activity, and even deliver drugs to specific parts of the brain.
It sounds straight out of a science fiction novel.
It does, doesn't it?
But the article argues that these are real possibilities.
As nanotechnology continues to advance.
Right.
And it raises concerns about using nanotechnology to bypass security measures.
Manipulate thoughts and emotions.
Even control behavior.
One passage warns that nanotechnology could become the ultimate tool for mind control.
Allowing covert and precise manipulation of the human brain.
It's a pretty scary thought.
It is. That our thoughts and actions could be controlled by tiny machines inside us.
This article emphasizes the need for ethical guidelines and regulations for nanotechnology.
Especially in areas that could impact human autonomy and freedom of thought.
Right.
Again, it reminds us that we need to be proactive in shaping the future of technology.
Ensuring it enhances human capabilities and well-being, not control and manipulate.
One thing that's come up a lot in these sources is the mention of ionospheric heaters.
Yeah.
What exactly are they, and how could they be connected to mind control?
Ionospheric heaters are powerful radio transmitters that heat up certain parts of the ionosphere,
Which is?
the layer of the Earth's atmosphere with a high concentration of ions and free electrons.
So basically giant space lasers.
Not exactly lasers.
But they do emit focused beams of electromagnetic energy.
Right.
And these sources suggest those beams could be used to manipulate weather patterns, disrupt communications, and even influence human behavior.
It does sound a bit like science fiction.
It does.
But these facilities actually exist.
And they might be capable of much more than we've been told.
According to these sources.
The sources also talk about scalar waves.
Yeah.
What are those? And how could they be used for mind control?
Scalar waves are a hypothetical type of electromagnetic wave.
Hypothetical.
Meaning they might not even exist.
So we don't even know if they're real.
There's no scientific consensus.
But the sources we're looking at say they're not only real, but they could also be used to send information and energy directly into the brain.
Bypassing our senses.
That's a terrifying thought, like having a radio transmitter in your brain that can broadcast thoughts and emotions.
That's where things get really speculative.
Because there's no proof that scalar waves exist.
Let alone that they can be used for mind control.
But these sources claim that this technology is being developed and used in secret.
And that the scientific community is being misled.
So it's a classic conspiracy theory. The government is hiding advanced tech from the public and using it for bad things.
Right.
But how do we know what to believe?
That's a good question.
How do we tell what's true when we're dealing with technology so far beyond what we understand?
I think critical thinking is key.
Being able to look at these claims objectively.
Considering the evidence and being open to questioning our assumptions.
And being aware of disinformation and propaganda.
Which are often used to discredit dissent and maintain control.
So it's a battle for our minds.
In a way, yes.
It's a battle for our freedom, our autonomy, our right to think for ourselves.
And it's a battle we need to be ready for.
You know, one thing I've noticed in all these sources is a recurring sense of fear and paranoia.
Yes.
Many people who believe they're victims of these technologies talk about feeling watched, manipulated, controlled.
They feel isolated, helpless, afraid to speak out.
Because they might be labeled as crazy or delusional.
It's like they're trapped in a world of fear where their every thought and action is monitored and controlled by unseen forces.
And that's exactly the kind of environment that mind control thrives in.
Fear, isolation, distrust.
When people are afraid to talk, and when they're constantly being fed disinformation and propaganda, it's much easier to control them.
Absolutely.
So what can we do to break free from this cycle of fear and manipulation?
Well, the first step is to acknowledge the problem.
We need to recognize that these technologies exist,
that they can be misused,
and that we're not immune to their effects.
It's about facing reality, no matter how uncomfortable or scary it might be.
Once we acknowledge the problem, we can start to address it.
And there are things we can do, both individually and collectively.
Like what?
Well, individually, we can start by becoming more critical thinkers and more careful about the media we consume.
We need to evaluate information, recognize bias, and look for different viewpoints.
It's about taking back control of the information we take in and being more discerning about what we believe.
Makes sense.
We can also take steps to protect our privacy and security online, using strong passwords, encryption tools, and being careful about what we share on social media.
So being proactive in protecting ourselves from surveillance and manipulation.
Right.
And supporting organizations working to raise awareness of these issues.
Advocating for stronger regulations.
And providing support to victims of mind control and psychological manipulation.
It's about working together to create a world where technology is used for good.
Not for control and oppression.
Exactly.
What can we do collectively?
Collectively, we need to push for stronger regulations and ethical guidelines for how these technologies are developed and used.
Making sure they're used for the benefit of humanity, not for harmful purposes.
Right.
Holding those in power accountable.
And ensuring that technology is used ethically and responsibly.
We also need to educate ourselves and others about these issues.
The more people who know about the potential dangers of mind control and psychological manipulation, the more likely we are to resist them.
It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and critical thinking skills.
So we can make informed choices and protect our freedom.
And our autonomy.
And finally, we need to have faith in our own humanity.
We need to believe that we're capable of resisting manipulation, of thinking critically, and of making our own choices.
It's about reclaiming our agency.
And recognizing that we have the power to shape the future of technology.
And our relationship with it. Another thing that comes up a lot in these sources is the idea that mind control tech is being used to manipulate and control society as a whole.
So not just individuals, but whole populations.
Exactly. Some sources even say that governments and powerful organizations are using this tech to shape public opinion.
To control political outcomes.
And even create social unrest.
It's like a real-life matrix.
Where the people in power are manipulating our reality to keep us under control.
Yeah, and it makes you think about some of the things we see happening in the world.
The political divide.
The social unrest.
The rise of extremism.
Could those things be influenced by forces we can't see?
It's definitely something to consider.
It makes you realize how important critical thinking is.
Media literacy.
Independent thought.
We need to be able to question what we're told.
To spot propaganda.
And think for ourselves.
You know, these sources also talk about how the media plays a role in this whole mind control agenda.
Yeah, they say the media is being used to spread disinformation.
To create fear and division.
And distract people from the real issues.
It's like weaponizing the media.
Using it to control society.
They point to how media ownership is becoming more concentrated.
And how social media is changing things.
Blurring the lines between news and entertainment.
It's a complicated issue.
But I think we need to be aware of potential bias and manipulation in the media.
We need to be critical consumers.
Seek out multiple perspectives.
And ultimately think for ourselves.
So what can we do to resist this?
To reclaim our freedom of thought.
The sources actually offer some ideas.
Some are pretty practical.
Like limiting exposure to electronics.
Using Faraday cages to block electromagnetic signals.
Practicing mindfulness and meditation to build mental resilience.
Others are a bit more out there.
Like using crystals and organite.
To deflect negative energy.
Or engaging in spiritual practices to raise consciousness.
It's a wide range of approaches.
Not all of them are likely to be effective.
But the point is, we're not powerless.
There are things we can do.
To protect ourselves.
Both physically and mentally.
It's about taking back control.
Of our minds and our lives.
Exactly. Recognizing that we have a choice in how we think, feel, and act.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners today?
What do we want them to remember?
I think the most important thing is to be aware.
To be aware of how technology can be misused.
To be aware of its potential to manipulate and control us.
But we can't forget that we have power too.
We can think critically.
We can question authority.
And we can resist manipulation.
We have the power to shape the future.
Of technology.
And our relationship with it.
That's right. The future isn't set in stone.
We get to decide what kind of world we want to live in.
What kind of relationship we want with technology.
And what kind of future we'll create for ourselves and future generations.
That's a great point. And with that, we'll leave you with this thought.
What if the real battle for our minds isn't against some outside force?
But against our own fear.
Our complacency.
And our willingness to give up our freedom of thought.
Until next time. Stay curious.
Stay informed.
And stay free